Great. So we're going to be looking at the Immersion Day Lab VPC hands-on, Immersion Day VPC hands-on lab file that you should have as well. And we'll be walking through that. So today we're going to create a VPC in the dashboard. One of the things I want to call out here is that in your account, if you got one of the accounts provided from us and most new accounts that were created in the last few years, there's a default VPC. And that's what we used, or I should have used yesterday during the EC2 lab. It's a quick and easy way for you to get resources up and running as potentially you're starting out with AWS or want to try something out with the resources available to you. It's provided there because it does take some time to create a VPC and there's some components into it. And this, the default VPC allows you to kind of jump in before those things get established or customized for you. And in this lab, we're going to use the wizard to kind of walk us through setting up the VPC with subnets and creating some resources in your account. And the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to allocate a elastic IP address. And this is a way for us to get a IP address that is assigned to us that we can reference so that we can potentially set up DNS to it or just have it available at our disposal. And in this, we're going to be allocating that elastic IP address to a NAT gateway. So let's walk through that. So I'm in the AWS console. We have the icons that I showed you how to create yesterday, but just as a little reminder, you can click on this pin and you can drag and drop different services up to it. Today, we're going to be dealing with IAM and VPC. So that's available to us, but you also can click services here, see recently used services, scroll through the different components. Here we're looking at networking. So we would look at networking, choose VPC as the service that we'll be interacting with today. And then this gives us a dashboard so you can see all the different VPCs for this region. Again, we'll be working in the Virginia region. So just a confirmation here on the upper right-hand side of the console. You can select different regions to launch resources in. We'll stick to Virginia. And you can see that I have a virtual private cloud. It's probably the default VPC here. And then different services that we can allocate as part of the configuration of the VPC. So the first thing I'm going to do is on the left-hand navigation bar is click Elastic IP address. And this brings us to this menu. I don't have any Elastic IP addresses allocated, so I'm going to click the Allocate Elastic IP address. And that brings up a window that gives me a choice of how I want this Elastic IP address to be allocated. And I want this to be allocated for a VPC. And I would like, just a little difference, EC2 Classic was how AWS first launched. This gives you the ability to launch resources outside of a VPC if you choose to do so, but it doesn't necessarily give you all the great features that a VPC has. So you do get security groups, but you don't get network access control list. You don't get an internet gateway. You don't get a lot of the bells and whistles like the VPN connectivity as such. And a lot of new instance types are only available in the VPC. So just in case anybody ever asks you what EC2 Classic is, it's the way people did things over 10 years ago. But we can go ahead and allocate that IP address now. And it gives you an IP address here, but it's not associated with anything yet. And that's fine because the wizard will take care of that for us. But it's something we just needed to do before we launched the wizard to create that thing. So I'm going to remove this little pop-up saying this there. Now we are charged for IP addresses that aren't associated. It's a fun billing model for this. Concept is that you're only charged for IP addresses if they're not associated. As soon as they're associated, you're not charged for it. It's kind of a way for them to conserve IP address hoarding or them not being used, to make sure they maintain their IP addresses spaces efficiently with Aaron. So we'll go ahead and go back to the instructions. We're going to click on the VPC dashboard, and we're going to launch VPC Wizard, and we're going to launch a VPC with public and private subnets. And just reading ahead a little bit, we're going to launch this with a /16 CIDR block, and then break it down into each subnet into a class C or a /24 IP address range. So again, launch VPC Wizard. We're going to do VPC with public and private subnets. The second option down, go ahead and click select. And it, by default, has set this up for me. Again, you can choose your own IP address ranges. You can do IPv6 if you like to as well. Fun things there. And let's just confirm if we have a name for this that it'd like to do. Let's call, this one says test, but I will call this one Immersion Day VPC. And then the next thing we're going to do here, so we're going to just keep these subnets that it's set up for this. First one's going to be a public subnet. The second one's going to be a private subnet. You can pick what availability zone. I don't have a preference, but you can see that there's a pick down menu of the VPCs or the availability zones available to me. Play on words. And then I'm going to allocate an elastic IP address for the network address or the NAT gateway. So this is the one that I just created. And typically, it should just pop up there for you. And we are good to go. And all we have to do now is create VPC. So while that's being created, it should be done in a few seconds. Cool. So it took a few minutes or a few seconds to get that done. So now we're going to go through and kind of look at what was created for us. So we're going to look at the main route table of the VPC to see how it's set up and talk about some differences of there. Typically, that's enough time for me to pause while the NAT gateway is being created, but this could take some time to do that. So let's just kind of talk about this while this resource is being created. So what we're going to do is look at our route tables, and we're going to see that the route tables, a table is associated with a subnet. So each subnet can be associated with, or is associated with a route table. And what we'll see is routes to various resources, IP address ranges. So the private subnet will have, no routes associated with it, while it'll have an association with the network address, the NAT gateway, while the public subnet will have a default route associated with the internet gateway. All right, that was enough pausing. Good job talking. So let's go ahead back to the console. And we see that here is my immersion day VPC on the dropdown. There's also the default VPC below it, but we're going to be focusing on this immersion day VPC that I just created. This VPC has a default route table and other components associated with it. Here's the CIDR block associated with it. But I want to here look at our subnets. So here are the two. So I just go to the left-hand column, click subnets. It's showing me all of my subnets, but I could search based off of the VPC that we're referencing right now, which is the immersion day VPC. Looking at this configuration, I can look at the public subnet, understand that it's associated with the VPC. I can see that it is in US East 1, but it's in the F availability zone. Gives you a little bit of information about the specifics of that availability zone. But what we really are interested in here is that route table. And the route table associated with this has a local target, so it's within the VPC to get to that larger CIDR block, and then again looking at the internet gateway to get to the public internet, and that's for the public subnet. Then if I switch by clicking atop to the private subnet, having that selected there, that box selected, it gives me information now about the subnets for the private subnet, and again, the local target as well as the public target going to the NAT gateway. So now we're going to look at the network address translation component of these. So this is what the NACL looks like for the private subnet. Again, right now it's explicitly allowing all traffic associated with it, but it is not publicly accessible because there's no internet gateway attached to the route table for the private subnet. Similarly for the public subnet, the same ACLs applies, but this is where you could put in rules to allow traffic or to control traffic at the subnet layer. Cool. So now what we're going to do is we're going to spin up a EC2 instance into the public subnet of the VPC. So just like we did yesterday, we're going to go to the EC2 dashboard, and we are going to select the Amazon Linux 2 AMI, which is the kind of the software image associated with the image we're launching, and the T2 type, which is the hardware profile for the instance. And then when we get to this, we will reference the VPC and make sure that we're putting that into the public subnet. All right, so again, we're going to EC2. I can click this icon here. I can look at services, potentially in your history. You'll have EC2 in your history of services. We'll go ahead and click Launch Instance. Select the Amazon 2 Linux AMI, the first one on the your console. T2 micro type is fine. Looking at details here, I want to make sure that I select the immersion day VPC. This is there, and then I want to make sure that I am putting this in the public subnet. So we definitely want to make sure, again, immersion day VPC, the VPC that you named, that you created earlier, and that you select the public subnet. And you'll see that the subnet settings of right now are disabled to automatically assign an IP address, and we'll walk through that in the lab. Here, we won't do any bootstrapping for this specific instance today. But this is where you do that, the advanced details. We'll use the default storage. And then here, we're gonna create a security group. I want to just make sure that confirming the security group settings. So we're going to use a default, we'll just give this a name, VPC public instance. And that's just the key name value, what you want to call it. And then here we're just going to you create a new security group that just has SSH access to it, which is be fine because we'll be doing some configuration with it in a little bit. And then here you can select the key pair that you created yesterday. This one doesn't really even need a key pair. So if you want, you can say proceed without a key pair. We're not going to actually be logging in to this instance. So that's launching. We can go ahead and look at it. And that's just clicking through that. If you didn't click through there, you can go back to the EC2 dashboard, click on running instances, or you can click on instances here. And you can see I terminated the instance I created yesterday before the labs today. And that's running. Let's select that, look at it. It's initializing and the like. And here we're going to notice something is that this instance doesn't have IP addresses. Just want to call that out. So again, we're going to do what we did. The first step is we're going to get an IP address, and we're going to then associate it with this instance. So again, in the console left-hand side, we're going down to network and security. In the EC2 portion of the console, elastic IP addresses. And we see an IP address there, but that's already been allocated to our NAT gateway. So we're going to allocate another IP address. Definitely want to make sure it's part of the VPC, and we can just take the default value for that. And now it's allocated. And now we want to associate that. So select that IP address that was just allocated, and then we're going to click on Actions, and we are going to associate the IP address. And we're going to associate it with the instance and choose the one that you just launched, which is, I called it the VPC public instance. And you don't need to choose a private IP addresses. We're just going to associate it with this instance. Click Associate. And now it's been associated with this instance. And the cool thing about the console is that it gives you a little quick link to get back to that instance by clicking that IP address. Again, if you need to, you can just click on Instances, and it'll bring you to the list of instances. Now you see that it has a public IP address to it. And I'm going to copy that. You can click copy to clipboard, little icon that pops up there next to it to get it copied, or you can select it is there. And then I'm going to bring up a terminal, and I'm going to start a ping. I'm going to ping that IP address. Cool. And as you can see, it's not responding. I'm like, okay, well, why is that? And if we were all sitting together, one of you would raise your hand and say, probably has something to do with the security group. And I'd be like, you are 100% correct. So what we want to do is go back to the console, and we want to look at the security group associated with that instance. And then we want to allow icmp, which is the protocol associated with the ping command. So I'm going to jump back to the console here and look at this instance and find the security group. And here under security groups, yours might be different just depending on your width. But I'm looking at the instance, VPC public instance, looking at the description, and under security groups, I see launch wizard number 1. I'm going to click on that to bring up that. And just a little quick thing, in the menu, you have a ability to kind of change the windowing size and the like. I just typically just drag these 2 windows to bring it up just to make it a little bit more viewable on that. But here's the launch wizard. It's selected. It's the only one you should be seeing here. And we're going to look at the inbound rules. And this is what we saw when we launched the instance, that it has that default of just allowing SSH port 22 from anywhere in the world. We can edit that inbound rule. And then here, I'm just going to make it quick and simple. I'm going to change it from SSH, and I'm going to look for icmp. And I'll just say all icmp version for IPv4. And I'm going to keep the from anywhere thing. As I'm just saying now allow ping from anywhere, which is what the 0.0.0.0/0 represents in a network address spacing. So now we save that spool there. And then if everything works magically, now we can see that we're getting responses. We now, with that public server, we can ping it. So I'll stop there and confirm. We've done that. So I'm not going to do this today, but wanted to let you know that you could also test connectivity. You can launch a IP address, or launch an instance in the private subnet, and then check connectivity to that. You could also even assign a public IP address for that instance. It will assign one for you. It won't be elastic, so potentially if you stop and start it, it will go away. But because that subnet doesn't have a route via the internet gateway, it's not going to be accessible to the public internet. It can make connections out to the public internet through the NAT gateway, but no one can get to it because the internet gateway is not associated with it. And then here, just ask that you clean up your resources if you choose to play around with it. If you have an account from us, they'll be terminated after this today, I think, or a day or so for you to use it. But you can play around with these resources for the next few hours or so.